Okay, thank you everyone for joining today. We'll begin with Ontario Greens leader, Mike Schreiner.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging I'm speaking to you from my home here in Guelph on the Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And we'd just like to reaffirm the Ontario Green Party's commitment to the truth and reconciliation process. I'd also like to acknowledge today that small businesses in Guelph and across the province are struggling. Their employees are struggling with the latest round of restrictions. According to CFIB, the average debt for small businesses in Ontario is nearing $200,000. This puts people's lives, careers, and even some cases homes on the line. I can tell you as a longtime small business owner, there are oftentimes small businesses are financing their businesses with using lines of credit on their homes. And so these small businesses and their employees need help. They need support now. And we all know that there will not be an economic recovery in Ontario if we don't have a strong, thriving small business sector. We know that the vibrancy and vitality of our downtowns and our main streets rely on a vibrant small business economy. And so that's why the Ontario Greens are calling on the Ford government to deliver the third round of Ontario Small Business Support Grant funding that rumoredly announced today or has been announced today, that it immediately get into the pockets of businesses and that the government fix the eligibility, access, and customer service issues that presented so many challenges to small businesses accessing those vital supports. We're also calling on the government to expand the commercial eviction ban, which expired at the end of last year. And finally, we're calling on the government to come up with some creative solutions to especially support the very hard-hit restaurant and hospitality sector. Solutions such as expanding the staycation tax credit to increase the eligibility of it by $500 for individuals and $1,000 for families. And so we can include restaurants in the top up of that particular program. These and other creative solutions are what is needed to ensure that small businesses across the province are able to survive this pandemic. And it's my pleasure today to be joined by a very well-known and prominent small business owner in my community in Guelph, Court Desautels, who is the owner of a handful of restaurants here in Guelph and in Kitchener, and is a board member of Restaurants Canada, and has been a strong and leading advocate supporting small businesses in our part of the province and across the province throughout the pandemic. So Court, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about what you've been experiencing as a small business owner, what your employees are experiencing, and the kinds of solutions and support you need from government.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the kind intro there. Yeah, as we all know, it's been a tough go. We're in the fourth lockdown now. Ontario being one of the most locked down places, not just in Canada, but in the world. And we need the support to continue. And I think one of the biggest pieces we forget that's not being addressed is it's not just the lockdown measures, these short-term lockdown or hopefully short-term lockdown measures that are really impacting the businesses. It's not this point now where I don't have people sitting in our restaurants or gyms don't have people working out. It really comes down to what was happening prior to the lockdown is that consumer confidence was essentially destroyed. In the restaurant industry, November, December are two of our busiest months of the year. And all the business group bookings, Christmas parties, holiday events, etc., they're all booked. As soon as the media picks it up that there's a new variant coming in, which is great, and we understand the health and safety is paramount for everybody. But we lost all those reservations. everybody, company policies, what have you, most of those reservations were canceled. And we were absolutely decimated with the amount of lost revenue at the beginning of, or at the, through November and into December. The subsidies only kick in starting December 19th. So that's the things that will happen prior to a lockdown. We see it through the media. People decide to stay home and don't go out. And then we get to the piece that comes after. So lockdown is supposed to end on, the end of the month, on January 26th, I believe, which we're all hoping for. But now it's the recovery time. It's rebuilding the consumer confidence. And that's where, we're trying to do, is trying to advocate for, is trying to just not look at a short-term solution just to get us through the lockdown period with some subsidies. It's how are we going to inject, confidence into consumer behaviors? The messaging from the government needs to say, hey, restaurants are safe. Restaurants have followed all the requirements through the government. We have vaccine passports, we have all the PPE, we've invested thousands and thousands of dollars into infrastructure to make sure that our patrons and the guests that come into our restaurant and our employees are safe. And so if we can come up with something like that staycation tax to include restaurants, it's huge. That's a huge signal from the government to say, we trust that this is, we're going to be fighting this for a while, but it's a safe place to be. Go out and inject some money into the economy, because it's not just the businesses that are impacted by this. You have to think about the employees. Restaurants are the fourth largest employer in the country. 1 in 5 Canadians under the age of 25 work in restaurants. Many new Canadians work in restaurants. There's people supporting whole families, and this is the fourth time they've either been laid off or just working on minimal hours. And these are these are real issues. These have really long-term lasting effects on people. It's not just businesses that are incurring debt. It's the people who are working in the restaurants that are either taking out money on their home, they're borrowing money to pay rent, they can't pay childcare. There's so many impacts. This is a complete domino effect, as well as we have to think about the supply chain. We deal with a lot of small farmers, and a lot of them, their businesses are completely disrupted. It's not just about, the ports being backed up with goods coming in. There's goods in our country that aren't being used, that are going to waste or being thrown away because restaurants aren't open and are not able to use them. So we got to start not just looking at the short-term solutions, but what are the long-term pieces that are going to create, a revitalization of our economy and bring jobs back and get people back on their feet. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to be discussing, is how to get people back on their feet, not just prop them up. You're on mute there, Mike.
Thanks, Court. I really appreciate the strong voice you've been for not only the restaurant sector, but other small businesses, small farms, gyms, et cetera, that have been significantly impacted by the public health restrictions, which, I know you've made it clear over and over again. You prioritize public health and public safety like most small business owners do. But at the same time, while you're taking the actions to protect our communities, shore up our healthcare system, we need to make sure government has your back and small businesses' backs across the province. So I appreciate you joining us today, and we're available to answer any questions that people might have.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
We will now take questions from the media. Please use the raise hand function and unmute when your name is called. We'll start with Adam Donaldson. Adam, please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Maybe for my first question to Court, realizing all this sort of aftermath stuff you were just talking about there, but what has been sort of the greater impact for you? The fact that these lockdowns and restrictions come on so quickly that they're announced one day and they go into effect the next day, so that you're caught unawares, or is it really about the impacts of these things themselves? Like, is there a way that if you were given more notice, you could better compensate as a businessman?
Yeah, it's both of them. It's notice is great, but I know it's hard to do. The biggest impact I have as a business owner is looking at my staff in the eye and telling them that we don't have hours for them, and seeing the anguish that they have and trying to figure out how they're going to pay their next bills. I think that's a big thing. We know that we're going to be dealing with this for a long time, and that's something that needs to be discussed. We are going to move to an endemic phase, and we need to start looking at what the long-term solutions are, and have those programs in place, and we're not scrambling at the last minute to implement them. We should already have a plan in place of what it's going to look like. So when we have phase 2, we know what the phase 2 subsidy programs are going to look like, and then our staff aren't scrambling to figure out how to find out if their hours or their income has been reduced by 50% or more by looking at the previous year's sales, and trying to then go into a portal that maybe doesn't work at the time to apply for funds. These people need funds right away, and so do many businesses, and we can't just wait for the details to be announced a month from now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for that. As my follow-up, just to confirm, the province did announce about an hour ago that there are $10,000 grants for eligible small businesses, plus additional electricity rate relief. So perhaps the two of you could offer some color commentary on that announcement.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adam. I think I'll start so one of the things I was planning on calling for this morning was to have $10,000 grant announcement to the Ontario Small Business Support Grant be immediately announced. So I'm going to shift a bit and say that the government has to make sure they roll this program out in a way that works for small businesses, that ensures that the eligibility requirements are set up so all the businesses that need support receive that support, that there's easy and timely access to that support, and that the government has a customer service portal to really assist businesses through answering their questions through the application process. There was a time when, I can't tell you how many small businesses my office was having to really just help navigate what turned out to be a very complex system. And in most cases, we were able to get those small businesses the funding they needed. But in some cases, it was a 6-month delay, which you can imagine, given the debt loads and cash flow constraints that so many small businesses are facing, that 6-month delays are simply unacceptable. And in some cases, there were a few businesses that never received funds for a variety of reasons. And so making sure that the program that's rolled out actually works for businesses, and that there's customer service protocols in place to help businesses navigate the process, it will be vital to its success.
Yeah, if I can jump in too, because I was able to just briefly go through it prior to jumping on here. But the eligibility requirements is what I'm struggling with. And once again, it's looking like if you have over 100 employees, you don't qualify. That hurts a lot of businesses. There's a lot of, you may have a big business if you have 100 employees, but you have to think about the restaurant industry is very, very labor intensive. Our biggest cost is labor and food prices. And we know food prices are going up and labor costs are going up. And so, you have to open up the eligibility. That's really what it comes down to. And understanding that also this money can't just be dispersed in February. People need to pay rent, at the first of the month. They can't wait to start applying in February. And I'm sure, there's going to be the narrative out there too, that a lot of businesses took advantage of the programs. Okay, but we have to look at the many who took advantage of it to save their businesses and the advantage it had. So yes, there's a few who took advantage of it, and the government needs to probably make a stand and say, we're going to find out who is taking advantage of this, and you're going to have to pay that back. And because it's not fair for all of us as taxpayers to incur that debt, and especially where it needs to go to the people who need it the most.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Jack Hohen. Jack, please go ahead and unmute.
Thanks. Hey, Mike. I was just wondering if you had a chance to look at Stephen Del Duca's invitation to his planning summit on the hospital staffing crisis.
Yeah, I haven't received that at this point. I've been meeting with nurses, healthcare hospital CEOs, and members, healthcare leadership over the course of this week, and putting forward many of their ideas around how we need to address the particularly health human resource capacity crisis we're facing. And I think one of the things, Jack, that's very frustrating for me is that the Ontario Greens widely consulted healthcare leaders over the summer and put forward a plan to the Premier back in August to be proactive about addressing the staffing shortage crisis that the healthcare system was facing at that time. And it's just frustrating that those recommendations haven't been acted on. And now we're in a true crisis right now. And I think we need an all hands on deck, all parties working together, putting forward solutions to address it.
Thanks. And I was wondering if a summit with opposition leaders, et cetera, would be something that you're open to, or, given what you've said about the frustration around the Greens already doing this work around finding solutions, whether you think it's more time for action.
Well, I certainly think it's time for action. I mean, I don't understand why the Premier has dithered and delayed in delivering action. But Jack, I'm always ready, and I've made this very clear since the first day I was elected, that I am always ready to work across party lines to deliver solutions that benefit the people of Ontario, and always willing, eager, and able to roll up my sleeves and do that work. But right now, I think the Premier just needs to act. I mean, the hospital CEOs, the nurses associations, the Ontario Greens, others have put forward solutions that the province could act on.
All right, any follow-up?
Oh, that's all from me. Thanks.
Next question comes from Graham McNaughton. Graham, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I spoke with Mayor Cam Guthrie earlier this week, and he had mentioned, as far as small business supports, that the province should be moving away from these grants and instead move to a longer term support program. He had mentioned, maybe having a one-year program that business could access as needed, especially if more lockdowns are in our future. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on a program like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the purposes, and I think Court nailed it in his comments, is that we're going to need the short-term, immediate, let's address the crisis, but we're going to have a long-term plan. It's one of the reasons in my third point was, let's start getting creative with some solutions like expanding the staycation tax credit. I think also having some clear guidelines, as Court suggested, that what are the supports that are going to kick in immediately if and when we are in various stages of public health response to the pandemic, so that way both businesses and their employees know what supports are going to kick in automatically, rather than the scrambling that we're once again going through, where people are wondering, is support going to be available? How much is it going to be? When's it going to be available? Who's going to qualify? We can save everyone a lot of anxiety, and I think ultimately save government time and money if we just have programs that automatically kick into place and are clearly defined ahead of time.
Yeah, I would agree. There's that immediate need for cash injection when you get shut down, because you're not just recovering from the immediate shutdown, you're recovering from what was happening prior to it. Like I mentioned before, with consumer confidence. One of the big struggles, though, is with these blanket approach subsidy programs, is they're really not industry specific. We need to have some industry specific support programs. Businesses are complex. They're complex issues. Everyone's business model is differently and they function differently. And so the blanket approach is great for getting immediate cash injection, but it doesn't really, there's so many fine, intricate pieces that need to be addressed for specific industries. And I think one of the biggest frustrating parts of, even my part sitting on the board for Restaurants Canada, is very rarely are we consulted on any of these issues. And bringing industries around the table, which we should have been doing prior to the fourth lockdown, maybe we should have done it by the first or the second, and we had a better plan in place. But if we would have had industry around the table, we start tailoring industry specific support that is for the long term, because that's the whole basis of the point I'm trying to drive, is that short term, great, but there's long-term impacts, and we know it, just not in business, but on mental health and everything else. And we have to start addressing those.
Now, the rest of my questions were answered, so I will pass it over to Nick.
All right, next question comes from Nick Makrowski. Go ahead and unmute Nick.
Hi, thanks for your time, guys. I just wanted to ask, do you feel Premier Ford is doing enough for Ontarians, even with this $10,000 grant? Do you feel like he's doing enough for Ontarians, or do you think like he could do more to help with the current situation that we're in?
Yeah, well, I think the Premier could be doing much more than what's being put forward right now. I think in three critical areas. So the first, which was brought up in a previous question, is addressing the crisis we're facing in our healthcare system right now, especially the health human resource crisis. So all three opposition leaders joined with nurses earlier this week and did a news conference calling on the Premier to repeal Bill 124 and address the wage and compensation constraints that nurses are facing. And I want to be really clear about that it's not just pay, though, my gosh, nurses deserve an increase in pay after what they've gone through in the last 2 years and are currently still going through, but it's also compensation levels to access things like mental health supports and being able to negotiate those kinds of benefits. The second is addressing schools and childcare. We need to get our schools open, like for our children's learning abilities, and just addressing the learning gap, and also addressing the mental health crisis that so many young people are facing. We need to get our schools open, and we need to make sure they open safely. And we need to take the next, well, it's less than 2 weeks now, but the next couple of weeks to put in place the measures we need. The fact that COVID is airborne, and we need to make sure that N95 masks are available, that ventilation issues have been addressed, that we prioritize teachers, educational staff, and students for vaccines and boosters, and that we really make the investments that we need in our schools to make sure they're safe and can reopen. And I would say the same thing for childcare. There's been so much talk about schools, but very little talk about making sure our childcare spaces have the exact same safety protocols put in place to keep our schools open. And then the third one is to make sure that our small businesses, especially those that have bear the disproportionate burden, and I'm thinking in particular of restaurants and gyms right now, who have been locked down more than any other sector, as well, and making sure that we have the kinds of supports, both short-term and long-term, in place that small businesses need.
Thanks a lot. No further questions.
Okay, next question comes from Vanessa Balantek. Go ahead and unmute Vanessa.
Thank you. And my question is mainly for Court at the moment. You said on Facebook yesterday that you're going to open the Woolly Pub's back patio and that you'd like to call on the Premier to take a seat at your outdoor dining patio. Like, would you really like to see the Premier join you? And if so, why? And what would you say to him?
It'd be great if he would join us. I think he would be able to see, one, the protocols that we have in place in the restaurants. I'd love to take him on a tour of what we've done. In our space, we have air purifiers running. We're fortunate we have a covered back patio with some heaters. It's a little chilly, so we're doing a BYOB, bring your own blanket campaign. But I think what would be really key would be to sit down with some of our staff that just don't have the hours, and just understand some of the struggles that they're going through. I think it's just getting a grassroots understanding of the impacts they're having on them, because in our company, we have 150 employees, and I bet you have 150 different struggles each one of them are going through. And so getting a better understanding of what's happening is going to hopefully help set us up for what these long-term solutions are going to be.
Thanks. And I think you just touched on it just now, but my follow-up is, are you hearing from restaurants that are dealing with staffing shortages as a result of COVID-19 isolations or burnout or anything in between? And if so, how the ramp down in capacity due to pandemic restrictions, how is it affecting that?
Well, it's interesting because, we have a lot of people that are worried about are going out, or we've had some people that have contracted COVID, especially in the last little bit. And so is it difficult to staff? Yeah, it is, because, we're very cautious. We're a very cautious group. I want to ensure everybody, it's not just a 5-day quarantine. If people don't feel well and they want to come back to work, we're not going to force them back to work. And so we've become very malleable, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to be able to put people in places. For example, I was working on New Year's Eve in one of the kitchens just to make sure that we were able to get the food out that we for the few reservations we had and all the takeout orders that we had. So it's really, the issue too, when somebody takes that time off is just trying to access the subsidy support. When you go through the whole application process, they're not getting a paycheck for 2 to 3 weeks deposited. So it's a bit of a struggle for our teams. And once again, it's just one of those things that you really have to talk to each one of them individually to really understand the impacts it's having on them.
Thanks a lot.
Next question comes from Wyatt Sharp from the Wyatt Sharp Show. Go ahead and unmute Wyatt.
Hi, Mike. Hope you're doing well. So I'm just going to ask, obviously, we need as many resources as possible to fight COVID. And obviously, I know you're not a medical expert, but I'm just wondering if you've had any consultation from medical experts, because we've seen lots of people, lots of politicians specifically, come out and call on the federal government to, or specifically Health Canada, to approve Pfizer's antiviral pill to treat COVID-19. Premier Jason Kenney in Alberta just called for it the other day. I'm just wondering if you've, been briefed by any medical experts on this topic, and whether or not you would support the authorization of it based on advice you've been given.
Yeah, Wyatt. So I've requested a briefing with the Province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Moore. We had a briefing with him just prior to the holidays, just before Christmas, just to have an update on a whole variety of public health issues. When it comes to approving antiviral drugs, absolutely, I'm hoping that they're approved sooner rather than later. But I obviously, as a politician, don't want to interfere within that approval process, because that should be science-based. And I think the way we, instill public confidence in things like vaccines, in things like antiviral drugs, is to make sure that we have a rigorous science-based process that is separate from politics in terms of approving those types of medications. But once they are approved, absolutely, we should be rolling them out and making sure we're making full use and taking advantage of them.
And so if you do get to have a briefing with Dr. Moore, will you ask his advice on the Pfizer antiviral pill, and would you ask his advice on anything else, perhaps booster shots for different age demographics? And obviously there's lots of stuff you could ask him, but speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I ask him a variety of questions. Wyatt, and certainly those will be part of the questions I'll ask. I think the most important point of making sure that all opposition leaders in particular are well briefed is that we're asked a lot of questions by the media and by our constituents. And I always want to make sure we're able to answer in an honest, transparent way. And having the most relevant and up-to-date information from the medical officer of health is an important part of being able to make sure we convey information to the public in a way that is most beneficial, most transparent, and most helpful.
All right, thank you, Wyatt. Are there any other questions from anyone else? A reminder to please use the raise hand function and unmute when your name is called.
Okay, I think those are all the questions. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Such an important issue to be supporting our local businesses. Court, I want to just really, once again, thank you for joining us today and for all the work you've done for small businesses, not only in our community, but across the province. And just to say to any members of the public tuning in, please on your own go out and support our local small businesses as well. They really need our community support. And I just want to just give a quick additional shout out to our frontline healthcare workers, particularly those who are working in our ICU units, which I know are under tremendous distress right now, and just how much we deeply appreciate the work of all frontline essential vulnerable workers, first responders, and frontline healthcare workers. Thanks, everyone. Be safe, be well. Have a good day.